Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is Season 5, Episode 6, number 219. Overall, those of you celebrating Thanksgiving this weekend, happy Thanksgiving to you. I would say a little bit of a lift this week here in Israel with a ceasefire in place in the north. It's precarious at every moment, there's no question about it, but maybe it's something. I wouldn't say it was an easy week here. It's really never been an easy week here at all over the last year plus. And this week was no different on some levels with that. But if you are taking a moment over the course of yesterday, today, and the weekend to breathe, to relax, to celebrate, to appreciate, to have a sense of gratitude and thanks, then I think there's a lot in that. And that's always true. Maybe it's more uniquely true now than at any other time. Our topic this week for 219 is indecision number 6, and it's called Leadership at a Price, which is similar from last week, but Leadership at a Price, Rebecca's choice between vision and fallout. Let's dive right in. We talk a lot about leadership. We've been talking about leadership for 5+ years here together, or this is the 5th year. Sorry about that. But it's always coming up. It's always a coachable moment. It's always a coachable situation. And there are few coachable situations more than the one we're going to discuss today with respect to Rebecca. And it underscores an appreciation of the complexity by which leadership is all the time, and the complex nature of the decision-making that goes into being a leader. A good leader, a great leader, an average leader, even a bad leader. And the reality that leadership isn't always about clarity. I think it really never is. Often it's about stepping into the gray areas where the stakes couldn't be any higher, the risks are overwhelming, and every option carries a cost. And here's the thing also, leadership happens when inaction is not an option. Those moments of tension and urgency really define who we are as leaders, and Rebecca is no different. And today we're diving into the story about one of these moments, about Rebecca's decisive and controversial leadership decision in securing the covenantal blessing for her son, Jacob, or what she believes to be the covenantal blessing for her son, Jacob. And we're also going to dive in for a few minutes here into the difference between Rebecca's moment and Sarah's moment from last week. Whereas Sarah acted decisively, commanding Abraham and seeking divine confirmation, which she gets, Rebecca's working what you might call covertly, in the shadows, behind the scenes, driven by her conviction and understanding of God's prophecy. I think it was year 1, or maybe year 2 of Coaching the Bible, where we talked about her commitment level to the cause. And I would direct you to that previous episode to appreciate some of the underpinnings about Rebecca's commitment to the cause. So here it is, Leadership at a Price, Rebecca's choice between vision and fallout, a story of bold decisions, ethical complexity, and the lasting consequences of one woman's actions. Starting off, let's look at that inflection moment. Picture it. The tent's quiet, Rebecca's moving around with careful purpose. She notices that Isaac and Esau in English, but Esav in the Hebrew, easy for me to say, are meeting. They're talking one-on-one. Isaac is asking something of Esav. Isaac's voice is calm and deliberate, and they're just speaking. And Isaac asks Esav to go to the field and to hunt some game and to prepare it the way he likes it, so that he can then bless him thereafter. Rebecca, seeing this moment taking place, has moved in subtly and quietly closer to what you might call the kitchen window or the doorway. And she bends an ear to hear this. And at that moment, time stops. Because this is a moment I believe she both has feared and anticipated. Isaac, seemingly on some level blinded to Esau's flaws and ignorant, maybe ignorant is a strong word, but unaffected, uninspired, not sure what the term is, with respect to Jacob's destiny, seemingly is set to be preparing to bless the wrong son. Her mind races. Does Isaac not see? Does he refuse to see what's right in front of him? Esau is not the one chosen by God. The prophecy she had was clear. The older shall serve the younger. It's coming back for her in her head. Maybe it's playing in loop in her mind all the time. If I don't act, what happens to the covenant? What happens to Jacob? What happens to everything that God has promised? And perhaps the most important thought, inaction is not an option here. Rebecca knows that failing to act could derail the covenant and compromise God's plans for the future. But the path forward isn't clear, and every option comes with risk. And so here she is in this inflection point moment, crossroads, call it what you will. Maybe you've seen one, maybe you've been in one. These are highly fraught, stress, anxiety, tense moments that leaders face. And maybe for a split second, she's exploring the alternatives. She realizes that no alternative is perfect, and none of them necessarily stand out to her as the right choice. Option one, confronting Isaac directly. She could say to him, Isaac, you're making a colossal mistake. Jacob is the chosen one. You have to choose Jacob here. You cannot bless Esau. But maybe it's Isaac's deep, quote-unquote, bias towards Esau that leads her to dismiss this possibility entirely. Maybe confrontation could damage her influence further or even escalate the tension. And so she dismisses alternative number one. Or maybe their relationship isn't in a place where that option is an actual option. Option two, trusting in the divine intervention. Rebecca could step back, trusting that God would intervene to realign the events. She could simply just stand in a corner and pray, step back, let it play out further, and let God's hand determine how it goes forward. Maybe to Rebecca, though, the risk there is a feeling that she may have she's abdicating her responsibility in the moment, her role in this event. What if God doesn't step in? Because we asked that question last week. We'll talk more about that in just a minute as we talk about the differences between Rebecca and Sarah. But we asked that question last week. Could Sarah not intervene there and let Ishmael stay in the house and continue? Let God handle that, and she's just going to be the mother of Isaac? Is Rebecca the same? Can she just let this play out? Can you, as a leader in some of those moments, have what we've talked about, strategic inaction? Is that a possibility here? To Rebecca, it doesn't seem like it is. Option three is subtle influence. Rebecca could work behind the scenes, perhaps, to guide Jacob, helping him earn Isaac's favor, quote unquote, naturally. But time is not on her side. Isaac's decision is imminent. She might have been thinking about this moment in the past, but here it is now. And so setting something up over the long term is no longer a possibility. She can't wait. If Esav is in the field, then dinner is coming and that blessing is right behind it. And option 4 is deception and manipulation. Rebekah could take matters into her own hands. She can orchestrate the plan for Jacob to impersonate Esav and receive the blessing. This is the one she ultimately chooses. This carries immense relational and ethical costs and risks. If her plan fails, imagine if it fails, the fallout could shatter the family. Now, we know the story plays out and how it ends well, quote unquote, for Jacob and for Rebekah. But imagine if their fears are realized and Isaac realizes what they were trying to do and Esav hears about what they were trying to do and now they're there and they don't have the blessing and they're trying to manipulate Isaac and they're trying to steal something from Esav and now they're still in the same house. None of these alternatives, the different options before her, what she imagines in her mind, the different pathways forward, none of them comes without risk or complexity or danger. And Rebekah chooses option 4. This sense of deception, subtlety, manipulation, strategy. Because no choice is perfect, but some choice is required. And maybe, like we said last week, protecting the covenant justifies the cost, even when the cost is high. And it's also important here to appreciate the difference between Rebekah and Sarah. Now, Rebekah never met Sarah, but I imagine she knows who Hagar is and who Ishmael, her husband's brother, is, even if he's not around. And imagine she knows the story of their departure from the tent. And so she has an opinion, maybe, that she keeps to herself about how she sees and how she thinks of Sarah. Be an interesting thing to unpack also. But she's different. Each of the matriarchs is different, one from the next. Important. Same way with the patriarchs. All the leaders that are brought down and shared with us, whether they're main players and main actors or they're second level characters like Lot, who we didn't discuss really this year, or they're anonymous characters who perhaps we talked about a little bit here and there, each one is bringing something unique and special to the story. And so whereas Sarah acted in response to an immediate and observable threat, Ishmael's presence in the household threatened Isaac's future, Rebekah acts to prevent something that's sort of a future misalignment. Esav receiving the blessing meant for Jacob. It's important to appreciate that difference. There's something that Isaac doesn't see. Maybe there's something that other people don't see as well, that she does see, and she is linking the moment present with the moment future and how the line is drawn between one and the next with the blessing that might be impending at this moment. That's not the same as what Sarah sees in her tent going on. Ishmael directly influencing the behavior of Isaac is an obvious direct threat. Esav being careful around the edges and behaving a certain way, perhaps at home as opposed to publicly and out with his buddies or in the field, which is away from his father, is a manipulation and potentially something that can be dismissed, maybe, for some future opportunity. And so whereas Sarah, in her leadership, acts directly and commandingly, cast out the slave woman and her son, the directive to Abraham, Rebekah is operating in what you might call covert and strategic, orchestrating this from behind the scenes. Whereas Sarah gets divine affirmation, getting the explicit support of God, who told Abraham to listen to her, Rebekah acts without direct divine confirmation. She's relying solely on her conviction and her interpretation of the prophecy that she received when she was pregnant with the 2 boys, without anything else. She's on an island. Whereas Sarah's actions perhaps resolved some conflict in the household, certainly that she perceives, Rebekah's decision fractures hers, leading to Esau's rage, Jacob's exile, and her own estrangement from both, because she never sees Jacob again. I imagine she doesn't have a great relationship with Esau after that. Who knows about her relationship with Isaac after that? She is leading through ambiguity without the clarity or even maybe the authority that Sarah has. And that's an important distinction, and it's important to appreciate. If you're a leader in that space, I want you to contemplate and consider that as well. When you're the leader without the authority and the directive that Sarah holds, how do you do that? Maybe you've been that. You're new to the team, you're an outsider. A big decision comes into play. Maybe you have to let somebody go. Maybe you have to do a strategic hire and move someone to a different role. Maybe you're pivoting as a company and it's your job to make that work. And you don't have the Sarah level authority to do that, but you have to do it. Inaction is not an option. So how do you act boldly in that moment, strategically in that moment, maybe subtly in that moment, appreciating and sensing and feeling almost like on your back, in your neck, in your shoulders, the tension and the stress that comes with that space. And so Rebekah here in her operation is a masterclass in what's called adaptive leadership, which most often comes up around Moses. More about Moses' inability to be an adaptive leader, which maybe we'll get to sometime later in our Indecision series when it comes to Moses. But Rebekah is a master. The concept of adaptive leadership is from someone by the name of Ronald Hafetz, who I believe we talked about before. And it's basically about navigating complexity and responding flexibly to dynamic challenges and moments. Adaptive leaders are not relying on rigid plans. They're thinking creatively and they're working within the constraints that they face. It's very much Rebekah. Again, it could very well be that she has many nights stayed up contemplating, considering when such a moment was going to come and how she might handle it. Without rules, without mentors, without people to speak to, knowing she has to act, knowing on some level that she has to act alone, knowing on some level that she has risk involved and complexity involved and relationships on the precipice. And imagine she didn't sleep for many nights as she contemplated this possibility. And so whereas in other places, in other situations, a leader simply might just lead based on prior history, here you have to be dynamic. And so first, she has to diagnose the system. She sees the system for what it is, the scenario for what it is. The dynamics of Isaac's favoritism, perhaps as a threat to the covenant going forward. Where she's leveraging influence over authority. She doesn't have really authority to do anything here, but she's leveraging her influence to achieve the goal. She doesn't have the formal power to override Isaac. She has dismissed the possibility of going to him and discussing this with him directly in communication, in a meeting, for lack of a better term. And so she's using influence as opposed to power to get where she needs to go. And she is really embracing, whether she wants to or not, embracing the relational and ethical risks and costs of her plan, believing that the stakes justify the action, as what we might call the ends justify the means. And the question for you is, when have you perhaps had to lead without authority? How did you adapt? When did you step into a moment that maybe didn't belong to you and you owned it, stepped into it, carried that on your shoulders? And maybe when did you do that in a space, in a situation where there was no precedent, for how to act? And so you had to adapt all the way through. As I said, maybe you took over leadership of a situation, of a team, of a company. Maybe something happens in your family and now you're operating in the dark and you don't know what to do, but you know that you have to do something. People are relying on you. People are maybe hoping that you'll do the right thing. And that's Rebecca. All of Jewish history is relying on her to act in this way, in this moment, and to get it right. No small thing. But she also has another thing where she's dealing with adaptive leadership. She's also dealing with what you might call the burden of vision. The burden of vision is the responsibility of acting on knowledge others don't share or understand. Visionary leaders often act in isolation. They're driven by the conviction rather than by the consensus. She sees something. She sees it unfold. She sees scene after scene, moment after moment, day, week, month, year after year unfold in the alternative reality, in what's called now the multiverse, of how that plays out in a different scenario. And she can't bear it. She knows the prophecy, the older shall serve the younger. She understands it a certain way. She understands that as Jacob's destiny to get the blessing, to get the covenant, to be that next patriarch, even as perhaps Isaac remains somewhat blind to it. But here's that thing about that vision. It is isolating in its nature. It forces the person to act boldly, often without guardrails, often without guarantees of success. So then take it inside for you. Let's munch on this for a moment. When have you ever seen a future that others couldn't? And how did you act? How did you live in the isolation, the skepticism, the loneliness that comes with acting on your vision? I talk a lot about that with startups and entrepreneurs, people who are trying to build great companies. They have to live and stew inside that isolation when everyone else thinks they're mad. And maybe now we come to the heart of it. The ethical core of Rebecca's story is the tension between the ends and the means. Her decision secures the covenant, but the fallout is immense. Esau vows to kill Jacob, forcing Jacob into exile. Her relationships with everyone either strained or ended. Jacob learns this quality of manipulation, of, I'll put it in quotes, deceit. It's a trait that shapes his leadership on some level. It shapes his family dynamics on another level, going down. At every moment after this, if you notice it, you'll see it, there is some level of manipulation or deceit going on as it relates to Jacob. It's hard when you see it. It's hard to grapple with it. But that's for another time. For Rebecca, was she right? Did the ends justify the means? Could she have pursued another path and gotten to the same result? We don't know. Leadership like this, complexity like this, leads us into ethical gray areas. And Rebecca reminds us that owning the fallout is part of the process. You cannot make the decision and not own the fallout. You cannot not make the decision, choose inaction, and also not own the fallout of that. Both ways, every way has what you might call risk reward, but also consequence, punishment, suffering. Rebecca never knows ultimately if she was right. She doesn't live long enough to see her decision bear the fruit that it needs to bear. It's heavy. And so what do we learn from Rebecca? We have to act decisively in ambiguity. Leadership demands from us bold action when the stakes are high. Inaction might actually be our greatest risk. Appreciating that in these spaces, God is silent. God isn't giving her the answer, whereas God was confirmation for Sarah. No God in this story directly interceding on her behalf, either way. And so when the cloud and the storm come, acting decisively. Number two is adapting to the constraints. Rebecca found a way to influence the outcome even though authority wasn't hers. And three, owning the fallout. Leadership always comes at a cost. Decision-making always is fraught with risk and consequence. And then one must anticipate and address those costs because that's essential. We're not even talking about how Rebecca gets Jacob to do this. That's not important. That's not crucial for today. Here it's this first point. Owning the fallout as it comes, appreciating that it's coming, maybe mitigating its impact as best as possible. But that's there. That's real. That's something that's coming. That's something you live with forever. So Rebecca's not perfect. No leader is. But leadership isn't about perfection. It's really about navigating the complexity with courage and conviction. And so, whereas Rebecca's story reminds us that leadership isn't about having all the answers and it's not about perfection, it is about stepping into that unknown, owning the risks, and acting with courage. And so I'll ask you these two framing questions and these two completing questions and two questions that relate perhaps to your decision making. What drives your decisions in moments of uncertainty? Have you ever contemplated how you think about making those decisions? What influences your decision making when the decision isn't clear? Distilling that out. And on the flip side of that, what have you learned from the costs of your choices and your decisions in those moments of uncertainty? That now you can re-engineer into the process of how you decision make, because it's always a learned experience. It's always changing, and you can always do it better, albeit not perfect, but better because you have lived and you have the lived experience, and you can appreciate now what happened because I acted in this way. How do I re-engineer it from the beginning to not have that as the outcome thereafter? Because in the end, leadership always comes at the price. And what's the price you're willing to pay for these moments? And to end with a quote, this is a quote from the great coach, Mike Krzyzewski, basketball coach, leadership coach. Leadership is not about making the right decisions. It's about making decisions and then doing your best to make them right. That is Coaching the Bible for this week. Again, those of you celebrating, have a great weekend. Happy Thanksgiving to all. Let's hope that the ceasefire holds. Let's hope that the people who live up north can actually go home. Let's hope we can get a deal in the south. And let's hope for better days ahead. As always, I invite your comments, your critiques, your criticisms, your questions, your insights, and I look forward to seeing you next week.